Thank you for that kind introduction. It's an honor to be here with you today. I'm coming from the Canadian Centre for Child Protection. We operate a number of programs and initiatives to help protect children online and offline. And so today I'd like to speak to you about what we're seeing, what we're hearing from youth, and then also some of the tools that we are utilizing to combat child sexual exploitation and abuse online. So, just quick overview of who we are and what we do. We are a charitable organization in Canada that has been on operation since 1985. We started the National Tip Line in 2002. And launched it officially in 2004 as part of the Government of Canada's national strategy for combating online sexual exploitation of children. So we take reports from the Canadian public related to online sexual exploitation, and we triage those to the appropriate law enforcement agency, child welfare agency, or we provide intervention services where we send notices to providers to get content removed and to get accounts removed that are abusing children online. We also operate a tool called Project Arachnid, which I'm going to talk about in more detail throughout the presentation, so I won't highlight that here. We have a service for youth called Need Help Now, which allows them to come in and get critical information on how to stop the distribution of child sexual abuse material and how to get support once they've had child sexual abuse material distributed or when they've had an online sexual exploitation incident occur. So they can gather information from our support services and gain critical intervention in the intermediate term once they've been sexually exploited. We also have education and prevention resources. We have a Kids in the Know program, which is a curriculum from kindergarten all the way to grade 12 that teaches personal safety, both online and offline. And there are specific modules dependent on the development and age of the child that look at what they're intersecting with in the online and offline world and how to better protect themselves. We have a program called Commit to Kids, which is for child-serving organizations. And essentially what that does is it provides them training, it provides them with guidance on how to create policies, procedures for their volunteers, for their staff members to help keep kids safe under their care. So that's a little bit about the Canadian Centre for Child Protection. Our organizational pillars are really twofold. We are about victim identification, intervention, and support strategy for those that have been victimized online. And then we also provide the prompt removal of child sexual abuse material. So our focus is about trying to get this material removed as quickly as possible in support of the victims of this crime. What we're seeing impacting kids. So Ms. O'Malley talked a lot about what they were seeing through prosecutions, and we're seeing very similar things through reporting to the Canadian Centre for Child Protection, through reporting to the tip line, through intersections that we have through Need Help Now with our support services, and the victims and adolescents, children that are coming in seeking out some sort of help once they've been sexually victimized. We see an increase in luring. I'm going to show you a slide with some numbers, data on the increases that we've seen in the last 5 years. Grooming, luring, this is the communication between an adult and a child to commit a sexual offense against that child. We also have seen a significant increase in the financial sextortion of youth and an increase in child sexual abuse material overall being shared on a global epidemic level. And I'll talk a lot more about that as we move forward and talk about Project Arachnid and how we're combating that. We see the sharing of intimate images on various services amongst youth through private channels, but also being publicly posted on adult pornography sites. You know, the user-generated, any type of user-generated service that receives content they are susceptible to receiving this type of content, and so they need to look at how do they better mitigate the ability for individuals to upload child sexual abuse material and exploitation material on their services. So I touched on this, but we are seeing an increase in the online sexual violence against children, especially over the last 5 to 10 years. In the last 5 years, we have seen a 735% increase in the number of children that are coming forward and talking about an adult, victimizing them online, communicating with them online for the purposes of committing a sexual offense against them. For a small agency like ours in Canada, when you have 3,000 kids coming in and talking about being extorted, that's huge. This is a huge jump from the 377 that we were seeing only in 2019. So we have a significant problem here, and we need to start addressing this in many ways. As a center, what we do is we look at the ways that we can help intervene in these situations. So recently we created a support team which intersects with kids in an intermediate basis. So what they look at is, from a trauma-informed perspective, how can they walk the child through the incident that they've experienced, and how can they get them connected to the emotional supports that they need in their local jurisdiction. This has been a huge move from the original tip line setup, where we were just really an information pass. We would share information with police, with child welfare, when there was a child in need of protection. We didn't take on that intervening role. So the move, because of the gaps that we were seeing in terms of the support services that were available for kids, was as a result of the victimization that we were seeing and the trauma that was occurring for these children. We also do a lot in the removal space. And I'm going to talk a lot about that throughout this presentation because that's a big pillar of ours, is getting child sexual abuse material removed from the internet, from public spaces, from dark web spaces as quickly as possible. So we are literally seeing a global epidemic of CSAM. We've seen all those different problems. We talk about all the things that youth are experiencing. These all intersect with child sexual abuse materials. These are the recordings of children who've been sexually abused as young children and then shared amongst the offending community online. These are recordings of kids who've been coerced to share sexual pictures, coerced into engaging in sexual acts on live streams, and then these images are shared amongst offenders, amongst individuals, platforms where it is easy to upload and share this type of material. This is not something that's happening in private. It certainly does happen on private networks, but we see it far more on the public internet as well. Far more than I ever thought before working in Project Arachnid. So, give you a little bit of background. We had, we'd been working for years, for 10, 20 years, on the issue of child sexual abuse and exploitation, and waiting for individuals to come in and report to us when they came across child sexual abuse. What we decided to do as an entity is look at it from a different perspective. We had technology, we had information, we had data from different companies, we had data from different agencies talking about the prevalence of child sexual abuse material on various networks and in the public domain. And we knew that we needed to start to look at this from a different perspective in terms of not waiting for someone to report it, but seeking out the child sexual abuse material and trying to get that removed, especially known child sexual abuse material, as quickly as possible. So in 2017, we launched a tool called Project Arachnid. What this essentially was at the time was a crawler looking for child sexual abuse material on the internet, sending notices to providers on a global scale when we detected known child sexual abuse material on their services. Of course, it's since evolved. We have added different tools, different aspects that are valuable to industry members, that are valuable to law enforcement, that are valuable to the global community in how we're combating child sexual exploitation and abuse in a more collaborative environment. We've done things like unifying global analysts in the detection, in the classification, and sending notices as a global unit, so that we are much more collaborative on this side of things. And this is really about a victim-focused tool. This is not necessarily created for law enforcement, although there are side benefits that allow us to give tools to law enforcement that give them valuable insight into what we're seeing online. But it is really about getting the material removed from the internet as quickly as possible so that individuals don't have to experience the victimization that reoccurs every time someone views that image. And we know from history that the longer an image stays up, the more likely it is to become more prevalent online, to be shared on vast number of different platforms, and the distribution becomes so wide that it's hard to ever combat. So we want to get out ahead of that as well, that ongoing distribution. So this is just a general quick graph of the different components that we have in Project Arachnid and how we kind of intersect with different stakeholders in this space. Obviously, we do the crawling aspect. You can see at the top there, we have the internet. We crawl both the public internet and the dark web looking for child sexual abuse material. Once that child sexual abuse material is detected, using a number of different data sources that we have from law enforcement and NGOs globally, we then push that material into a classification tool to make sure that we have a classification for that particular image, that particular piece of media, video. And this is where we work with other global tip lines. And they work with us in classifying material so that we can get that removed on a global scale. We also have a database related to survivors and those that are coming into us seeking out support. Information that is related to both young prepubescent children as well as post-pubescent adolescents who've been victimized online, and material has been shared amongst the offending community. And then finally, we have our intersections with industry. And we kind of have twofold intersections. One is when we detect child sexual abuse material on the internet on a particular provider, we send a notice to that provider. There are about 1,500 providers worldwide that have received notices from us since 2017. And most are pretty responsive in terms of removing it as quickly as possible. Some have whitelisted us so that as soon as they receive a notice on an image, they remove that right away. Then we have another set of industry members that are motivated to do more in this space. They are looking for tools, for avenues to mitigate the distribution of child sexual abuse material on their services. And this is where Arachnid Shield comes into play. So this is a tool, an API, essentially, that companies come into us. They can upload media. They can scan the media that's on their network directly, or they can utilize the hashes from that system to mitigate the distribution of child sexual abuse material on their local networks. So that's a little bit about Arachnid. What I want to touch on here is what we're actually sending notices on and how the process works. So we have analysts both within the Canadian Centre for Child Protection and within other agencies that help us to classify and review material. So this is the analyst assessment piece. Now, once an image has been verified, it has 2 votes. Then we put it onto our verified list. And anytime we detect that on any platform that we're crawling, that we're scraping, it will then send a notice to that provider to have that piece of material removed. If they don't remove that within 24 hours, we send another notice. And this is a harassment policy. Essentially, we want them to remove this as quickly as possible, and you will continue to receive notices until you remove that piece of media. Now, certainly that doesn't work in every case. We have some problematic providers, and I'm going to show an example later on of one particular problematic provider that we deal with. And then we look at other ways of escalating and getting action taken for these victims. When we talk about arachnid detection, there are kind of two pieces. There's the one where it's an exact match. So when we see an exact match to an image, to a video that we have within Project Arachnid that has been classified by 2 analysts, we will send a notice automatically to those providers. When it's a near match, when there's been some edits to that piece of media, we push that piece of media into the classification tool so that our analysts on a global scale can review that and, yes, verify that that is, in fact, the same piece of media or a very similar piece of media that we've seen before. The difference in terms of notices that we sent, we send a few different types. And the reason for this is we've broadened what we need to do in terms of the exploitation that we're seeing online. So there's stuff that is clear-cut criminal code definition material. Children who are being sexually abused or who are in very sexually exploitative images that would meet criminal code thresholds. That would be under the category of CSAM. Those are the types of notices that go out to providers and say, this is child sexual abuse material, it's illegal here in Canada, and it likely meets the legal definitions of child sexual abuse material in your country. We do a similar notice for those intimate images of individuals under the age of 18. So when we have children who've come in talking about being coerced into sharing a sexual picture or being extorted as a result of sharing sexual pictures, we will send notices to get that removed from various locations as well. And then we have our content that is not necessarily illegal, but is harmful or abusive to a child. And I'll provide a little bit more information here on what those are. So what that looks like is media that is related to a sexually exploitative incident, but doesn't necessarily meet criminal code thresholds. So we have kids who've been sexually abused, where there's pictures of the sexual abuse, but then there are also pictures of them standing next to the bed, clothed. There are pictures of them that are used amongst the offending community to highlight that there is this material available. So it could be a picture that was taken outside of the room where they've been abused, and that picture is now being used to advertise the availability of child sexual abuse material. We send notices to get that removed. We send notices of children, or notices on children's pictures, children's nude pictures that are being used to sexually exploit them, to get those removed. And then we send notices on physical abuse videos, physical abuse pictures, torture, bondage, those types of things that don't necessarily meet criminal thresholds in all jurisdictions globally. So you can see here we have a very comprehensive system in terms of fighting the trauma and the exploitation that occurs for victims. And one of the key pieces to this whole system, this whole process, is the global collaboration that we have with entities like the Missing and Exploited Children Center here in Croatia, as well as a number of other entities that work with us on a global scale. Right now, there are 15 organizations that come into our classification tool, and they classify media alongside our team. We have more than 60 analysts now within the system that work on a daily basis classifying and getting material removed from the internet. We are looking at expanding that. We have a number of other entities that have connected with us in the last 6 months that would like to join Project Arachnid and work with us on a closer collaboration in terms of the removal of child sexual abuse and exploitation material. So the global benefits of this tool is that it removes the geographic issue, the jurisdictional context of the content. It allows us as a collaborative group to come together and classify material no matter where it's located in the world, and send notices to those companies no matter where it's located. This is a shared responsibility. This is something, these are not just Canadian children that are in our data sets. This is a global set of children that are in the data sets that we use for detection and removal of child sexual abuse material on a global scale. And these are global companies that our kids' material is intersecting with. So it is up to all of us to kind of come together and to learn from each other and to work together to combat child sexual abuse and exploitation. It also helps because we now have a shared data set in terms of what is known child sexual abuse material, what is concerning material that appears to be child sexual abuse material, but that victim hasn't been identified yet. Offenders talk about these victims all the time online. So you could have a 15-year-old that you do a visual check of that picture, and you're like, well, I can't tell that she's 15, just based on visual review. But all the data we have in Project Arachnid points to the fact that she's 15 years old, which helps analysts in the global community to say, yes, let's get that removed. We're going to work together and have that particular piece of media removed. So since we started Project Arachnid, we've scanned more than 170 billion images through the system. Now, these aren't all child sexual abuse. This is just, in general, what the system is processing since 2017. We have triggered more than 80 million images into the system for analyst review. So there's certainly a backlog of material to go through, because so far we've only sent 40 million takedown notices related to child sexual abuse material. But often, material is grouped together. It's on file sharing sites. It's in archives where you have entire sets that are together. So through this global collaboration, we've done a lot of work, but there's still more to do. There's still so much more we need to be working at. And we often run into problems with companies that are ignorant of what we're doing, that are resistant to what we're trying to get accomplished, or that just do not care. So we've employed a number of different tactics to get content removed. And this is just kind of to highlight that not every actor in this space is a good actor. And the fact that we do need to do more to push some of these companies to ensure that child sexual abuse material is removed from their services. And I would even go as far to say is upload prevention is the next step. We should be, any of these companies should be able to scan and ensure that their networks, that never hits their network, that they scan before it's even uploaded. We have the tools, the availability to do this. Shield by Project Arachnid allows us to do that kind of work immediately. We have examples of companies that intersect with us that before you even, when you attempt to upload an image, before it even hits their server, they scan it quickly, and within seconds there's a response saying it's child sexual abuse and exploitation material. This example is a major service provider in France that was basically providing a file service for open use on the internet. We had tried for years to get content removed from their service. We'd been sending notices to them. Occasionally, material would come down. We would try again. The response was pretty opaque, meaning that they weren't always coming back to us. They weren't letting us know what they were doing. We would often see the same images and videos up on their service over and over again, or they wouldn't even remove the archives that we had already notified them of. So in 2021, we published a report which included naming the company. And Forbes ended up picking up on this report, and they published an article that connected the owner of the telecommunications company to this small network that they were running on the side of the telecommunications company. And at that point, all of a sudden, within 36 hours, the whole service went down. All the material was removed, and we were able to get more than 2 million images and videos off of the internet because of that action. So sometimes it takes more than just the notices. Sometimes we need to push in different ways. We need to work with police. We need to work with media. We need to work with other entities to get action on some of this stuff. And this is the importance of a product like Shield. So Shield is free to service providers. There's no charge at all. And what it allows you to do is to mitigate child sexual abuse material from going through your network. So one, if you're a user-generated service, what you can do is you can ensure that anything that's posted to your service or any image that is about to be uploaded to your service is scanned against all the data that we have in Project Arachnid, and that material is not allowed to be uploaded if it's known child sexual abuse material. So that's one way of intersecting. Other ways of intersecting with SHIELD are to download a list of hashes based on what's been classified in the system and utilize that within your own products for scanning. So there are some bigger providers that come into us and they gather the hashes and then they do their own scanning on that side of things. And then we have data for filtering providers. So what we do is we provide lists of URLs that are hosting child sexual abuse material, and those filtering providers, those internet service providers, can then block their customers from accessing that content. And that's the third way of using SHIELD by Project Arachnid. So certainly you can connect with us to get more information through that URL, and we're happy to set you up with, if you're a service provider, with the data that you need through the system and an account so that you can access and use the API on a daily basis to mitigate child sexual abuse from occurring on your platform. We have tools for law enforcement as well. So if you're a law enforcement agency that is looking to do more in this space or looking to understand the distribution of particular imagery on the internet when we're seeing it through Project Arachnid, you can come in and utilize the tools that we have that allow you to get the context surrounding that distribution, where it's been, where Project Arachnid has seen it, and some of the conversations surrounding that. So that's also available free of cost to law enforcement. So beyond the removal side of things, we also do a lot in terms of providing support for families. There are a number of things that we do in terms of crisis intervention. We will connect with the youth. We'll walk them through the steps that we're going to be taking on their behalf. We'll intersect with the companies. So if they come in reporting that a particular user on a particular service has abused them or exploited them, we will connect with those companies to get those accounts taken down and to get it reported into places like the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children when these providers are in the US. So there's some action that can be taken in those places. But really, it's about intervening as quickly as possible in these situations to stop the ongoing sexual abuse and exploitation. We have a tool for youth to come in and upload material when they've had it distributed online. They can come in, they upload the material into Project Arachnid. We can then crawl for that and get that removed if we detect it in online spaces. We do a lot in terms of advocating for families, looking for ways to get them the support that they need. We have parents who come in and we do safety planning for them. We look at how they can mitigate their child from being exploited online, how they can continue to have intersections with the online environment in a safe manner, and what they can do moving forward. In terms of removal, I just wanted to quickly provide this example. This is a good example of how we worked with law enforcement to get content taken down. So in 2012, we had a victim come in to us. She reported that when she was 17, she had had this video that was surreptitiously recorded by this male. It was now posted on a variety of websites. So at that time, the way we worked was we would go out to police, we would provide them with the information. We didn't have Project Arachnid. We weren't in the game of removal. That was up to law enforcement at that time. Fast forward to 2021, we had the same agency come back to us and talk about the fact that they were having difficulty getting content down. And they had heard that we'd started this project called Arachnid, and they were looking for some support. Could we help them get 20 websites removed of this victim? So we said, sure. We got them to upload the material back into Project Arachnid so that we would have that, because we didn't store that stuff at the time, back in 2012, but we needed to get that into Project Arachnid so that we could detect that. Since that time, since 2021, we've seen more than 12,000 URLs of this poor victim online. And it's growing. We see that this one is shared on adult pornography sites across the internet, and it seems to replicate rapidly. So these are the keys in terms of combating child sexual abuse and exploitation. We need to come together and look at how we address this, how we look at this from a holistic perspective, and work together. So this is just quickly some of the resources we offer through our support team. And then finally, I want to touch on a support strategy. So for us, this is what feeds into our survivor support strategy. Victims coming into us through Need Help Now, through cybertip.ca, seeking out support once they've been sexually exploited. The information that we gather through Project Arachnid about the exploitation, so individuals in the online offending communities that are posting material of unknown victims who are under the age of 18. That also helps us in terms of identifying victims and providing support to them, looking at how we can get that material removed for those victims as well. So what I want to end on for you guys is a few quick takeaways. I think it's really important that, that countries start to look at this from the perspective of what is our survivor support strategy, and how are we going to figure out the intersection points for those victims? How are we going to support them through these incidents? And what sorts of actions are we going to take in the removal side? So yes, there are investigations that need to happen in certain cases, but we know that police are overwhelmed with what's happening. We know that especially in Canada, police can never get to everything that's coming through their door because there's so much victimization that's occurring. So how do we work together to lessen that victimization? How do we work together to ensure that these survivors, these victims, get the support that they need, the emotional support, the support in removal of abusive accounts, the support in getting through these situations, while still providing the information that law enforcement might need to move forward? But first and foremost, intervening. That is an important part of the strategy, is intervening in these situations as quickly as possible and mitigating the risk for these victims in the future. So, thank you very much. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer those after.